Hello everyone. Good evening from Bangladesh, and some part I think in some part we are in good evening also. So today I'm delighted to be here, and today I'm moderating the session of our white and black fungus in ICU, which is organized by MA Shomrita Hospital and Medical College, and also a live partner is BD Physicians, and actually healthcare pharmaceuticals is supporting us. So today our webinar is on the fungal infections in ICU, and I'm very glad to announce the faculties and the chairperson and keynote speaker. So today we have with us the chairperson, who is Professor Dr. Syed Atiqul Haq sir, who is a legend in our physician society, and he is the president of Asia Pacific League of Associations for Rheumatology, and he is also the founding chairman of Department of Rheumatology in Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, Dhaka. Today we also have keynote speaker Dr. Rajesh Chandra Mishra, who is the honorary consultant intensivist and internist and Epic Hospital and Kidney Healthcare, Ahmedabad, India. And also he is the president-elect ICCM 2021. We have with us a very special guest, who is Professor George Hidalgo, who is the Secretary General, of World Federation of Intensive and Critical Care Medicine from Belize City, Belize, and he is also head of the intensive care unit and COVID-19 unit in Belize Healthcare Partner Limited, Belize. Today we have also eminent expert panelists with us, Dr. Shihan Mahmood Ridwanul Haq, who is the Associate Consultant, Internal Medicine and ICU, Square Hospitals Limited, Dhaka. Dr. Arafat Hussain, who is the Assistant Professor of Critical Care Medicine in Mugda Medical College Hospital, Dhaka. Dr. Leelabati Thakur, who is the Senior Consultant and Coordinator of Critical Care, Bengal Faith Medica Hospital, Burdwan, India. We have with us Dr. Ahsan Ahmed, who is the Chief of Critical Care and Emergency Services of KPC Medical College, Kolkata, India. Dr. Sudipta Mukherjee, who is the Consultant Critical Care Medicine of Tata Medical Center, Kolkata, India. Welcome everyone. We all are in a very prestigious platform here. And I'm very glad that we are arranging arranging this webinar, and from the different corners of the world, we are all together here. So I want to hand over to the Professor Dr. Syed Atiqul Haq sir. He's the chairperson of today's session. So to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank the organizers of this webinar for giving me the undeserved privilege of chairing this webinar. And I would say that, the fungal infections have been existing on this earth since ancestry, and they are particularly more prevalent in our countries, particularly the developing countries, mainly because of, I would say, lack of sanitation, or I would say insanitary environment or poor hygiene, presence of many decaying organic materials in our environment. So these are very common. But at the same time, these diseases have been neglected in most of our countries. Like I can say in our country, even in most of the major tertiary care hospitals also lack well-organized department of mycology, either clinical mycology or laboratory mycology. These are quite absent in our country and in many other countries of the world. We are all aware that, COVID-19 is a pandemic that has devastated the world, but at the same time, it has, unraveled. I would say it has revealed many ugly truths of our societies, and those ugly truths include, the injustice, lack of priority to the healthcare, then, ill-organized structure, inefficient structure, poor governance. All these things in our countries have been disclosed by the pandemic. Now the political leaders of our countries have started to think that we have to pay attention to the healthcare sector, and we have to improvise. We have to bring, I would say, some sort of radical reforms in healthcare. The need has been felt strongly because of this pandemic. And at the same time, the pandemic or this COVID-19 has brought to the focus the importance of fungal infection that has been so far neglected. Now it is clear to us that fungal infections are not to be neglected. For example, we can say we are very much now aware of the black fungus or mucormycosis in India, but we also know that there are outbreaks of aspergillosis, even pulmonary aspergillosis and severe systemic aspergillosis in the Americas. And also there are resurgence of other fungal infection like fusariosis, nocardiosis, and also deep tissue candidiasis. These are also coming up as problems. So now we can no longer neglect these fungal infections. So this is the place where the importance of this webinar lies. And we are lucky. I feel extremely privileged that we have got Dr. Mishra. Dr. Rajesh Mishra, a staunch academician and an inspiring focused leader in the field of critical care medicine in India and SAARC nations. He is one of the pioneers and a strong propagator of closed ICU system and comprehensive care medicine. And he is a strong believer of providing cost-effective management to critically ill patients. And now he is working as the honorary consultant in intensivist and internist in the Epic Hospital, Kidney Health Hospital, Narayanpura, and also Sanjeevani Super Specialty Hospital. We feel very lucky that Professor Mishra will speak on this topic in today's webinar as the keynote speaker. We are also lucky that we have very important and knowledgeable panelists, but most importantly, our guest of honor, our special guest, Professor George Hidalgo. He is the professor of critical care medicine and Secretary General of the World Federation of Intensive and Critical Care Medicine and head of the Intensive Care Unit and COVID unit in Belize Healthcare Partner Limited. We are very much so much fascinated to Belize for its beauty. He will be a panelist in this, and we shall hear very important aspects of these infections in critical COVID cases. So may I now invite Dr. Rajesh Mishra to deliver his talk, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for kind introduction. And the first thing about good evening and good morning to some part of the world, and good evening in Asian country. I've been asked to talk about the black and white fungus. The first thing I want to make you very clear that black and white fungus is not really a clear word. It has, because of the excessive necrosis caused by mucor that looks like black, but fungus itself is not a black. Fungus is golden or golden fungus. So the black fungus per se, anything, the things tissue become necrotic and dead. That's why they look like black, but the fungus is not black. So when we say white fungus, the white fungus is more for the candida, not for aspergillus, because aspergillus candida is of black color. So these two misnomer has come particularly in this part of the world, which we need to clear. So now we go to the main talk. So first thing about the mucor. The mucor is ubiquitous in our environment, particularly wherever there is a tropical environment. And in this region and any hot and humid area, the spores brew up and then you inhale. You inhale them, our immune system takes care of them. But when the environment, particularly in our system or in your, when you become sick, And for any region, there is excessive increase in glucose or there is excessive acidic environment. The classical is diabetic ketoacidosis or septic acidosis, and there is excessive glucose. This provides a media for this fungus to grow. The size is around 5 to 15 micron, irregular hyphae, and there is a septation, which is fragile. This is how classically you can find this fungus and diagnose. The different name for this mucor is Rhizopus, Coningula, Saxenia, or Epiphysomesis. This is how they look. The problem with this fungus is they invade their blood endothelium. And once they invade their blood endothelium, they spread very fast. They causes microthrombosis and ischemic damage to the tissue. Risk of any environment, particularly the chelating agent like iron or aluminum, that is desferrexamine and iron chelates, and this chelating agent release lot of iron, which is in oxide form, which increase the risk of the mucor. This iron is a food for this mucor, and excessive increase in free oxide iron level leads to the excessive growth of this tissue. Steroid, apart from this chelating drug, the other risk factor is steroid. If you're taking very high dose steroid for a very long time, it also leads to a very independent risk factor to cause mucor infection. Hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, solid organ transplant patient has a 15 to 55% risk to get this. And definitely if you are on chelating drug. If you are having HIV, again risk factor. So, and diabetes. If you are having uncontrolled diabetes, the risk grows up to 25 to 35%. Then healthcare associated. If you are in an environment of healthcare or in ICU where hygiene is not very good or ventilation is not very good, this fungus grow there and you can definitely get contaminated. And if you are immunocompromised, then chances are there you will get infected. High ferritin level, particularly in COVID time, I feel is another independent risk factor for cause mucor. And in our country, particularly in Asian country, the excessive high dose of use of steroid plus excessive very high ferritin level due to disease itself, and then a lot of patients got a lot of zinc supplement has really contributed to get more and more severe case of mucormycosis. Then, if you are having natural disaster like tsunami, volcano, the risk of death with mucor increases because of the environment changes. They become more ubiquitous, and the people who are immunocompromised are more likely to get this infection. COVID-associated mucor, we have seen mucor in rhinocerebral, we have seen gastric, we have seen mucor in lung. So these are so most common is the rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis. This is the what it happens, but this blackness is not because of the fungus. This blackness is because mucus has invaded the endothelium. There is a microthrombosis. There is no blood supply to this area is gone, and this tissue becomes gangrenous, and that's why this necrosis is there. Most of the time, it is associated with diabetic ketoacidosis, pain, severe unexplained pain, nasal discharge, periorbital edematosis, and leading to blindness. These are the symptoms which you can have from rhinocerebral arthritis. Another area apart from this nose is the hard palate. You just ask the patient to open the mouth and you can see black thing coming out. These are the patient which has very poor prognosis if you don't intervene early, because the delay in the treatment will cause more worsening of the patient. 50% of the patient will have fever, Nasal ulcer or necrosis, another 35 to 40%, and periorbital facial swelling around 35%. Loss of vision is another. Isolated loss of vision, particularly in COVID time, we have seen a lot of patients, and these patients needed complete enucleation of the eyes to save the patients. Ophthalmoplegia has a relatively good prognosis because this patient did not need surgery, just good care and periorbital amputation injection has helped them in recovery in some of the patients. But we need to be very, very careful in this time that any patient who complain of the sudden onset pain in eyes and difficulty in vision, you might be dealing with a mucormycosis infection. Cyanotitis, headache is the other complaint. Apart from rhinosinusitis, another area of mucor involvement is the lung. It can involve, it can inhale, it can involve any part of the lung. Right from the diffuse region to cavitary region, anything can be the symptom. It will disseminate to the renal and it may disseminate to the brain as well. If it goes to the disseminated stage in lung, kidney, or brain, the mortality is as high as 96%. GI mucor is another possibility where it can, though this media, because the gastric environment is full of acidic media, and which may help even for the mucor to grow here. So gastric mucormycosis, which can present with the right from the side severe abdominal pain to the bleeding, and if you do endoscopy, you may find the ulcerative lesion, and if you do biopsy, you can find, and this can be as high. So a lot of patients, these patients who are coming late to us with GI symptoms, we do endoscopy, and here you can find the lesion. Even colonic involvement and form of bleeding can be another presentation with mucormycosis. So pain, GI bleeding, and perforation can be the symptom with involvement of gastric mucormycosis. Cutaneous mucormycosis, we have not seen many in this COVID, but this is a very likely possibility that one can have cutaneous mucormycosis. Diagnosis, the histopathology is confirmatory. PCR-based region, particularly from the fluid like CSF and or whatever fluid, particularly nasal discharge, can help. But histopathology is confirmatory and which can be done as soon as within 2 to 4 hours if you take the appropriate tissue to diagnose the lesion. Multi-top examination is another way to diagnose the mucorm infection. So what are the treatment we have? Extensive surgical debridement, which you may need repeatedly, is the first thing we have to look for. Medicine or antifungal do not penetrate to dead area. Antifungal will work to contain the spread of the disease. But whatever the dead and necrotic tissue is there, if you can operate, then you can save the patient. Otherwise, mortality is very high. Liposomal amputation B is the drug of choice, and initially you can go up to 5 to 10 milligram per kg per day, and up to 10 milligram, and later on you can step down by following the creatinine amputation. Even liposomal amputation B can cause renal dysfunction in higher dose, so we need to be very, very careful in giving liposomal amputation B. And second complication with amputation B liposomal is the severe hypokalemia. So we need to follow both of these things properly. Apart from that, adequate extensive control of the sugar and diabetic ketoacidosis treatment is the important thing. Apart from that, many times in severe disease, we have tried to combine amputation B with IV posaconazole or isavuconazole, which is not recommended. Amputation B is the isolated drug, which is drug of choice in most of the mucormycosis. Until how long? It can go up to 6 weeks to 3 months. Posaconazole can be used IV or oral tablet in 300 milligram BD for day 1, and then OD can be used as a step down therapy if patient get stabilized, and you need to follow up the patient, and many of these patients needs treatment for 6 weeks to 12 weeks. You need to monitor the posaconazole serum level if you are depending on the treatment coverage. Isavuconazole is another drug which has been used in case control studies, not really a definitive trial. The dose is initially 200 milligram 8 hourly for 2 days, then 200 milligram OD. This also can be used as a step down therapy. Not, but by any chance, if you do not have availability of amphotericin B, then if tablet, not syrup, we're talking about the syrup, a tablet posaconazole or injectable posaconazole or tablet or injectable isavuconazole as the treatment which can be looked at the alternative. IV posaconazole, 300 milligram day 1 and then 300 milligram OD. If creatine clearance is less than 50 ml, it should be avoided. Isavuconazole, 200 milligram 8 hourly for 2 days and then OD. Isavuconazole is safe in AKI. So around 70 patients, more than 6 days of treatment, and improved mortality was reduced with this isavuconazole. This vital study with isavuconazole has shown. Isavuconazole has shown to reduce mortality with the if given appropriately. Posaconazole suspension is not recommended. The response is not that good. The response is excellent with injection or tablet. Duration of therapy till it's completely resolved, which can be 6 weeks to 8 to 6 weeks to 8 or 10 weeks. Combination of antifungal therapy. There was a trial. There was no difference in 90-day survival, even for invasive mucormycosis, rhinoorbital mucormycosis. So it is not advisable to go for combination. There's a lot of background talking, please. So benefit from surgery, antifungal, outcome, reduction in mortality and dissemination. AKI is a risk factor. Rhinoorbital can present with the hemiparesis, bilateral sinusitis, or in cases of leukemia. Mortality in rhinoorbital is around 25 to 60%. Desferrexamine, a lot of people tried as a chelating drug, but it is not recommended. In fact, there are more deaths in the patient where desferrexamine was given. Hematopoietic bone marrow transplant patient, the mortality benefit has been seen with the amphotericin B. So in summary, rhinoorbital pulmonary is the main thing which we see in ICU, particularly in COVID time. Steroid and diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, is main precipitating factor. Common one is mucor, that is rhizopus. Desferrexamine, that is free iron agent, increase the risk of mucor. Diagnosis is with histopathology, PCR, and multi-talk. Preferably histopathology is the way to diagnose. Treatment is extensive surgical debridement. You need a very good ENT surgeon friend, supported by antifungal, preferably liposomal amphotericin B in the dose of 5 to 10 milligram per kg per day, and good control of diabetes. Other drugs like posaconazole or isavuconazole can be used as a step down, but not as a first line of drug. Outcome, risk factor for mortality at dissemination is there is likely, particularly with rhinoorbital, delay in diagnosis, hemiparesis, bilateral sinusitis, and even in leukemia has been shown, and mortality has been very high in rhinoorbital case. Particularly, we have seen, particularly in India, I don't know other part of South Asian country, a lot of people started taking cow dung therapy, and this is another thing which can be a risk factor for getting mucor in India. Another mucor, which you are asking, is a white fungus. It's not really a white fungus. Aspergillus. It grows ubiquitously in environment. This conidia get inhaled, and it most of the time our immune system is able to control it. But if you are allergic, if you are asthmatic, and if you are taking steroid, this conidia grow particularly in upper airway or in lung. There are different forms of Aspergillus, particularly, but the most important, most commonly which we see is Aspergillus flavus. Apart from that, we have other species, but for us, the deadly one is Aspergillus flavus. This is how this conidia grow in upper airway, and particularly in sinuses. So it's not only the mucor, but even Aspergillus you can find in sinuses. Major risk factor for invasive aspergillosis are prolonged neutropenia or neutrophil dysfunction. Corticosteroid therapy, especially for more than 3 weeks of high dose therapy, which we are doing in most of these patients. Post-transplant, hematological malignancy, particularly if there is a high risk of leukemia, cytotoxic drug, and AIDS. Many a time, because Aspergillus is ubiquitous and there is a risk of colonization, there is a way to diagnosis that depends upon the appropriate symptom, that is persistent fever, patient is immunocompromised. You have some test, either it is by gram staining or by PCR based test or tissue based test, and then it should be supported by CT scan or microbiological workup that can be culture or fungus staining or biomarker. Biomarker for Aspergillus is BTGM, that is beta T galactomannan, which can help you in identify the as this person appropriately. So based on this, if you have CT negative, biomarker negative, it is unlikely to go for the prophylaxis or any treatment rather than you monitor this patient and treat the sinusitis. If there is CT scan positive by biomarker negative in appropriate risk factor, you can start prophylactic treatment. You can monitor, but you can think to give prophylactic treatment. If CT scan negative, biomarker positive, alternative cause of the sinusitis should be ruled out. Treat as a possible fungal infection. Here it is not prophylaxis. Here you have to go for probable therapeutic. And if CT scan positive, biomarker positive, then you have to treat. So there has been always a confusion between when to start prophylaxis, when to use start presumptive therapy, and when to start definitive therapy. Based on your biomarker, histopathology, and suggestive test, along with CT scan, one can try to find that when they have to start prophylaxis, presumptive, or definitive treatment. The drug of choice is voriconazole, 6 mg per kg IV 12 hourly, then 4 mg per kg every 12 hourly. Oral drug is also effective if patient is able to take orally, is equally effective. But if there is other drug going, because voriconazole has got a lot of drug interaction, one should monitor the therapeutic drug. Alternatively, I will not recommend liposomal amphotericin B or isoconazole, or any of the echinocandin for this thing. But if there is a possible resistance to voriconazole, this drug can be done. Secondary drug like Caspo, Fosa, or itraconazole also works on that. But most of the time, voriconazole is the drug of choice if we given an appropriate dose. But this drug needs therapeutic drug. This was a little bit about the black and white fungus. In COVID time, we have seen more of the black fungus, that is what you say mucor. We have also seen definitive Aspergillus infection. But what we have seen that all the patients who were getting steroid, who were high dose steroid, who were getting antiviral, they were also getting a lot of prophylactic dose. So misuse of the antifungal, particularly posaconazole and voriconazole, has also increased proportionally. Even if we start prophylactic dose, is a prophylactic medicine in COVID patient, it's not going to change outcome. but it's going to change outcome. You need to be very surveillant and try to diagnose early. If you can diagnose early, and then if you start therapeutic treatment, then it can change the outcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is all from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh Mishra, for your valuable lecture. And it's really a very good presentation. So I think Professor Atik sir will comment about the presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. You know, the lecture given by Professor Mishra was excellent. And actually, I think at this advent of this, I would say, somewhat imminent or impending third wave, it was very much important for us to be aware of this mucormycosis, its diagnosis and treatment in all these affairs. And I think Dr. Mishra has very nicely described how to diagnose the cases and also how to treat. And I hope, I wish that, you know, mucormycosis does not invade our part of the world quite aggressively, though there are a few reports of such cases in our country also. But I wish that it doesn't spread as it has occurred in India. But we must be cautious, and also we must be prepared to fight it if it comes with such a rigor. So I congratulate Dr. Mishra for enlightening us with the knowledge of diagnosing and treating mucormycosis at this critical juncture of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Atik sir, for giving us your valuable time and also giving comment and being with us. So I think today we have a special guest with us, Professor George Hidalgo. Actually, I want to know about his experience and in this pandemic, actually, what they are facing or what's the situation overall. So over to you, sir.
Yes, well, first of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Mishra for an excellent presentation. As I can say, as usual, we usually enjoy hearing your presentation, Dr. Mishra. Thank you. And then, of course, the incidence of opportunistic fungal infection is dramatically increased with COVID-19 patients, and for multiple reasons that Dr. Mishra mentioned, and then of course we will discuss during the panel. Patients with a lot of comorbidities, diabetes, ventilation, the compromise of the immune system. In this side of our area, we are not seeing too much cases of mucor. We are seeing, but not at that amount of cases that you guys are facing, especially in India. No? I remember my first case of mucormycosis during internal medicine training. I have the opportunity to see on the classic presentation with ketoacidosis, diabetes ketoacidosis. That is probably the most common presentation that we've seen in before the pandemic and before COVID. Now, of course, we know that the indiscriminate use of steroids and different other factors that Dr. Mishra very well illustrated in the presentation are important. And then as well as you guys, we are seeing also different ways of presentation for COVID. We are seeing in more younger population. I believe each phase, each wave of the COVID, it has his own challenges, no? And then all of us need to face it, and based on resources, and with the advantage that at this stage, our knowledge is better, no? We are still definitely increasing in the understanding of the condition, but at least every day with this type of forums, we have the opportunity to know what everybody is doing and trying to put all efforts together for the better of our care for our patients. mean that I think so is a lot of work ahead, but I congratulate you guys to put these forums together to exchange ideas. Nobody has the total knowledge, and this opportunity to exchange ideas is important.
Okay, thank you, Professor George Hidalgo, for your valuable comment. So I think now we can go to the panel of experts, because already we had lots of questions with us. So we know that the main problem is dealing with fungal infection is that they are difficult to diagnose, and more so is the restricted environment of a COVID patient. So it's very important, for example, to get a good patient, a good deeper sample by doing a BAL would be difficult in a COVID patient. Many of the lab tests, like in our country, we can say that the biomarkers, beta-D glucan and galactomannan, or the more specific, but low-yield fungal cultures are not widely available in this part of world. And what I personally think that the cost is also a big issue. So most commonly, we have to start antifungals empirically. That is on a big guess basis. So I think the experience is very important. And so we are here to infections. The more serious ones are very less. So actually, I think we should take the questions. So first question, actually, I will go to Dr. Rajesh Mishra. Is there any role of using prophylactic antifungal, especially in a susceptible or subpopulation like already immunocompromised, on high dose steroid systematically or inhalational? So your comment.
So honestly speaking, if we go by the data, there is no role of prophylactic prophylactic antifungal either for Aspergillus or for mucor for preventing it. You can take care of good hygiene. You can control sugar. You can control the steroid, but you have to be watchful. A lot of patients has been given voriconazole, and what we have found later on that voriconazole may be a risk factor to cause mucormycosis also, or you may be inducing resistance in mucor. So if we go by science and evidence, no, but since this is unprecedented condition and we are learning, I can make a case where if you are having very high biomarker like very high ferritin level, and a lot of people are using pulse dose of steroid where they are giving 1 gram per day or something like that. If that is the case, and if patient is on life support, you can investigate, you can send culture, you can start prophylactic antifungal, but if you do not find anything, better to stop. Most of the time, these patients will have invasive candida, lungs. They can have Aspergillus, very unlikely, but they can have. But starting voriconazole and relying on that it will prevent other infection may not be a good practice. So you have to keep on hunting, and if you don't find anything, better to stop. So start in presume, it's called presumptive therapy, presuming that there can be in this factor Aspergillus. If you do not find anything in a histopathology, in a test, in a lab report, then better to stop. You cannot keep on going antifungal. Yes, Sudipta.
Okay, thank you. So my next questions to
Lopa Sudipta has raised hand.
Sudipta, I think, yes.
Sir, I agree with you fully, but only what we have learned from our experience that the patients who are receiving tocilizumab, out of 100, nearly 80 to 85% of those patients are eventually developing Aspergillus, at least in my institute. I work in a cancer.
That is everywhere. That is everywhere.
Most of the patients are baseline of the immunosuppression. So after looking at our data, what we have started, if someone is on tocilizumab and have a second pulmonary hit, like worsening increase in the oxygen requirement after an initial improvement, we are starting empirically antifungal either voriconazole or posaconazole, and sending the biomarkers and also the ET aspirates or the BAL for the workup.
I fully agree. I fully agree. Same thing I said. You start, send biomarkers, same test, and if you find negative, better to stop it. Don't continue.
Right. But we are doing that only for tocilizumab, not for steroid.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question
No,
actually
actually, what happened, Sudipta, a lot of people, although finally we realized that there is no benefit, but a lot of people have given 1 gram solimedrol, they have given pulse dose therapy, different recommendation, different people following. So once you give solimedrol 1 gram for 3 days, you become highly susceptible to get any kind of fungus. So these are the patients that, I mean, you can get Candida, you can get Aspergillus, and even mucor. So, so you start prophylaxis, but you keep a watch that you may develop infection. And if you are lucky not getting anything, patient getting better to stop it. Don't continue for indefinite.
Right. Agreed, sir. Agreed.
So, Sudipta, just I have the question because you are working in Tata Memorial Hospital. So, what is the patient is not getting tocilizumab? So, can this prophylactic antifungal help to prevent fungal co-infection?
No. At least that is not in our experience. So, as to share our practice, we are not using steroid in a very high dose. The highest dose of steroid we have used is 2 milligram per kg of methylmethylzone. We never go beyond that, at least in our 1.5 year, 1 year, 3 months, 4 months of experience in COVID. And even if someone is in steroid, we found that though they are hematological patient and they are immunocompromised, we are not seeing that amount of Aspergillus or Candida. Candida incidence is very less in my unit. But the people who are getting tocilizumab specifically, and if they are hematological patients, hemato-oncology patients, at least 75 to 80% of those patients eventually having Aspergillus in terms of the clinical picture, in terms of radiology, and also with the biomarkers. We are doing Aspergillus PCR and galactomannan both in blood and also and galactomannan in BAL sample also. And so in our experience, if we are giving someone tocilizumab and the patient after initial improvement, patient start deteriorating, you have a very low threshold to start empirical antifungal, either posaconazole or voriconazole. And as Dr. Mishra rightly mentioned, if the test reports are negative, we stop immediately.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very good information and it will help us a lot. So my next question to Dr. Lilavati Thakur, that is in a seriously ill COVID patient who is falling to improve or having prolonged hypoxia. So features of sepsis, when actually should you consider starting an empiric therapy with antifungal?
First of all, till now we didn't feel the requirement of starting antifungal because patients are generally getting managed with good antibiotic support and all. But definitely we have to keep it in mind that we should not be giving unjustified high steroid use for a long time. And I think because of that, we still now, we didn't come across any kind of invasive fungal infection in lungs. So I think that is the only clue where we are succeeding. But definitely, if you find some patients who are coming from other hospitals after staying for a long time, having erratic steroid dosage and lot of antibiotic. Recently we got a patient who stayed for 25 days in another nursing home and had gone through all kinds of antibiotics possible on earth. And finally we got her here. We stopped all the antibiotics and she actually was better after that. And what happens is that, I mean, loading with a lot of steroids, loading with antibiotics, and even sometimes voriconazole, they also give all kinds of this, and that predisposes the patient to having a mucormycosis or in that sense. So I think that is the thing we should be taking care. And obviously, yes, if the patient is continuing with fever despite antibiotic and I mean adequate, more than adequate antibiotic therapy, and the patient needs long-time steroids, and patient needs a ventilation. There is a definite, I mean, change in the ABG, very unprecedented. Yes, we suppose that this is maybe because of invasive fungal infection in the lungs. So we start with voriconazole for that reason.
Thank you, Dr. Leelabati Thakur. So I'm going to Dr. Ahsan Ahmed because he is also working in a very big setup in a KPC hospital where they are dealing with lots of COVID patients. So what you think that which drug would you like to choose actually, considering no restrictions or supply or cost, and why?
Fortunately, we don't have to come to any case of mucormycosis till now. So, and also we got only out of around 3,000 patients, we got only one case of Aspergillus and a few cases of Candida. So our choice initially, we after 2 or 3 weeks only with high dose of steroid, those patients were not recovering, staying in the ICU for a long time. So in that cases, we send cultures as well as we do biomarkers. And we only start antifungals when these patients are in high risk zone, like immunosuppression, the patient is uncontrolled diabetes. So our thinking is that prevention is better than cure. So we try to prevent in all aspects to prevent these fungal infections. We change our water of the humidifier regularly. We follow the strict asepsis protocol. In spite of that, we, as I told that we have got on aspergillosis where we have used the voriconazole. And for Candida, we usually start with fluconazole. And if the patient is not responding, or by the time the culture comes and if it is not sensitive, then we choose accordingly. And we usually prefer echinocandins like your caspofungin or anidulafungin.
Okay. Thank you very much. So actually, this question, I think to Dr. Arafat Hussain, are you here? Dr. Arafat?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so actually he's from a government COVID hospital. Actually, he's working as a ICU consultant there. So is it, did you get any cases like mucormycosis in COVID patients? So can you share your experience?
Thanks, Dr. Lasina, for your questions, and thanks to Dr. Rajesh Mishra sir for your nice presentation. I'm working as an assistant professor and head of intensive care in critical care in the Medical Hospital. Probably I am dealing more than 50 patients in ICU with complication in my hospital. But for the last 6 to 8 months, I've not found any case of mucormycosis there. As like Dr. Ahsan is stating, the finding of Aspergillus and Candida in my ICU, most of the cases I have found on the due to the uses of the high flow oxygen and also in the high dose of steroid and methylprednisolone there, I found a lot of cases of Candida and one or two of cases of the Aspergillus, but that was not reported because one thing is that there is lack of fungal culture facilities and biomarkers very much poor in our country. Also in Dhaka city, I think it's only 1 or 2 centers plus DSMU and Burden Hospital are doing the only fungal culture. So I have not identified their cases earlier. So it is very much difficult for me to previous prior to find out a case of mucormycosis or other fungal infection. When they arises, the risky presentation or subcutaneous manifestation, then I use antifungal locally or injectable form or oral form, and then I do take part in a prophylaxis way because I cannot confirm the cases there. One thing I want to ask to Rajesh Mishra sir, you are talking that the voriconazole is a risk factor for updating the mucormycosis. Is it only the voriconazole or all sorts of azole group? because you know that voriconazole and liposomal amphotericin is a highly cost drug. In our BDT, voriconazole is almost 2,500 or 3,000 BDT taka, and liposomal amphotericin is 16,000 taka per vial. So it is only the voriconazole or any kind of azole drug. Can I use fluconazole as a prophylaxis for the COVID patient who is getting the high dose of steroid there? Number one question. And number two is that there is patient getting humidified oxygen. It is one of the richest source for fungal infection so far I think. So repeated changing of the humidifier and sterilization is one of the important important aspects for decreasing the fungal infection. Is it possible to use the any bacterial filter or any type of filter which can prevent the fungal infection to a patient getting isonazole or biped, except the mechanical ventilation, sir? A question to Mishra, sir.
So I'll take your second question first. We do not have enough evidence or anything to document that industrial oxygen or oxygen humidification does cause fungal infection. But what is most important that when you are using humidification word, you have to be very, very clear that you are really using clean, sterile water to warm up. That simply putting water in that container and giving oxygen through that doesn't humidify your oxygen. So that practice should be anyway abandoned, and we do not do. We just give oxygen directly through container. We do not put any water in that container, if you can remember. So that very strictly we have asked everyone not to put any kind of water in oxygen container through which, if you want to humidify oxygen, warm that water to a temperature of 36, 37, and then it gets humidified. And chances of getting that water contaminated with bacteria or fungus reduces, and keep changing that water frequent. Now, your first question that can you use any other azoles apart from voriconazole for aspergillus? So no, voriconazole has got very high efficacy against aspergillus, but same is not true with fluconazole or itraconazole. Itraconazole works more with the skin infection or soft tissue infection, skin and nail infection, not really in the lung. It doesn't have very good lung penetration. Fluconazole is more of the Candida specific drug, which is also Candida albicans in 50%, doesn't work on other non-Candida albicans. So voriconazole remains the drug of choice for this aspergillus. Prophylaxis, we should, I know that there are a lot of limitation in diagnosing, because imaging, histopathology, BAL, all these things have been practically impossible in COVID time. And that's why people started using more empirical drug. More empirical drug you use, more drug abuse happens, more complications happen. So that's not the science. That's a convince, medicine of convenience, but not the science. We have to find our way to diagnose and treat it. More the empirical therapies we use, more problem we will have. Either it is empirical antibiotic or it is empirical antibiotic.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions?
Sorry, I was muted. There is another question from our audience, Dr. Faisal Ahmed. He asked that should liposomal amphotericin B be administered on daily basis or on alternate day basis to prevent nephrotoxicity in mucormycosis treatment? Dr. Rajesh Mishra.
Okay. Amphotericin B, if it is using liposomal, it has to be given daily in a dose of 5 mg. Preferably we use 5 mg per kg, but in a serious case, particularly if there is a CNS involvement, even we go up to 10 mg per kg. You have to hydrate the patient well. You have to, even if it is liposomal you are using, you have to monitor the renal function and potassium, but it has to be given daily. And later on, you can come down in dose, maybe up to 3 mg. Then the patient start getting better. There has been trial of the twice a week and thrice a week higher dose therapy with amphotericin B, but did not apply for sick patients. They're more for the stable walk-in patient where you don't want patient to come daily. There it can be practiced, but not in a sick or unstable.
Okay, thank you. So now let's move to Dr. Shihan Haq, that you are also working in a tertiary hospitals, Square hospitals, and I think you are also treating lots of COVID patients there. So can you share your experience to us?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lupa. First of all, I must say I'm very much honored to be in the panel of experts of these distinguished panels. And I must congratulate and thanks Dr. Rajesh Mishra for his brilliant presentation. Regarding experience, yes, in in our hospital, Square Hospital, in 2020, during the first wave, we've treated around 3,000 patients in ICU and ward. But fortunately, at that time, we didn't find any case of mucormycosis. But in the second wave, that is the last wave that we faced, the number of patients was less than the first wave, but we found one confirmed case of mucormycosis and 2 suspected cases. And the 2 suspected cases actually couldn't confirm because we lost the 2 patients, but they had the features of this, the sinusitis and blackish discoloration and orbital involvement, but we could not diagnose that patients. And the one we confirmed the mucormycosis, that patient was actually post-COVID. The patient was initially admitted and he got all the tocilizumab steroids. And then after discharge, after 1 month, this patient came to us with the features of nasal discharge, foul smelling, and some pain in the cheeks. Then he went to ENT surgeon. Initially, we didn't thought of mucormycosis, but as the suspicion was there, because we are hearing news of mucormycosis from the reports from India, so we further dig out and we did the biopsy, and then find out that it was mucor. And then regarding the management, the surgical excision was done, and he is now getting the liposomal amphotericin B. Almost more than 1 week he's getting, is now still admitted here. But you know, the liposomal amphotericin is very much expensive, even in our country. So I have also a question to Dr. Rajesh or the other experts. How do you manage the cost? Because the liposomal expense is very much expensive and the duration. Is there any alternative, or do you find, how do you experience with posaconazole? Because we don't have the posaconazole right now. But if the cost is lesser than that, and if you think that it is effective, then maybe we can try to get this drug here in Bangladesh.
You are muted.
It's not cheaper. Posaconazole is also very expensive, much more expensive, particularly IV drug. So if the cost is the factor, conventional amphotericin B can be used. But conventional amphotericin is nephrotoxic and severe hypokalemia is a problem. So if you are pushed to the ball, if you can give like conventional amphotericin B, hydrate the patient, keep a watch on renal function until your patient can tolerate. You can give daily or alternate day of the simple amphotericin B, which is very cheap. The hydration and watch on creatinine and potassium remains the rule. As far as IV posaconazole is concerned, we were so short of the liposomal amphotericin B that we have used even tablet posaconazole. It has shown to work. It works. Not really highly effective, but definitely it helps in containing the disease. As I told you, the surgical treatments remain the drug of choice. Even we have used isoconazole in some of the patients. It really helped us in controlling the disease, but the drug of choice remains liposomal amphotericin B. There's no second thought.
Okay, so
Thank you.
there is a question that can we get fungal elements in standard aerobic blood culture test?
Not in aerobic, but anaerobic, anaerobic.
So there is another question.
Sudipta want to say something. Sudipta?
Like at one point, because in my institute being a cancer hospital and we deal with lot of poor patients, So for them, using liposomal amphotericin B sometimes become very, very challenging. So at least our hematology department has a good experience with conventional amphotericin B, deoxycholate, and said they follow a standard protocol of hydrating those patients, monitoring the renal function, use pre-medications, and they are pretty confident in using liposomal, conventional liposomal or deoxycholate in these patients. Myself, before joining Tata Medical Center, I never used conventional amphotericin B, but in last 3-4 years, I have used in before the COVID. I have used in few patients, and I think that nephrotoxicity is definitely there, but it is not that bad like our understanding was. If we monitor them properly, if you hydrate them and give the dose in a titrated manner, probably we can use it at least in a subgroup of patients.
So I think this is a difficult question. Can I ask this question to Professor Hidalgo? That actually what's happening, the fungus like Candida, as per Mucor previously, these used to be prevalent in serious immunocompromised patients like organ transplant or cancer patients on chemotherapy. But with COVID pandemic, there seems to be distinct change in the behavior of this fungus, although not much is known about this fungus and their character yet. So do you think there could be a direct pathophysiological correlation or symbiosis between a virus and a fungus?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and as we've been saying, we are learning a lot from what is happening with the virus during all this year of seeing different cases, and of course it depends on the personal behavior of each patient as well. It's typical as the doctors say in the Center of Oncologists, we have seen aspergillosis. We in our cases we are not seeing a lot of fungal infections. I mean that the question is that right here, what is happening? Like for example, in India, what is the particular factors that make the India group seeing a lot of mucormycosis compared with the rest of the world? Is any genetic predisposition of that? What is happening? We already before the pandemic, we usually seen, I think so, most of the mucormycosis cases around the world in the Indian population. And I don't know, I'm not have experience, but probably Dr. Rasheed, when I finish my comments, he can elaborate on what are the particular that make the population more prone. It could be the environment, the tropical situation there. We have tropical countries as well in that area. But despite of that, we don't see. The majority of cases we've seen was at the beginning of the HIV infection, where we have a lot of different type of fungal infections, histoplasmosis, in particular in our region, we see also a lot of coccidioidomycosis. We, in particular, as Dr. Subdita mentioned, we have a lot of experience using the conventional amphotericin B, and with all the different precautions that we need to take using that, we don't see too much problems with kidney failure. I mean that we will need to know, and as probably we will need to it's essentially a good opportunity to do a good trial and to understand what are the particular situations and also the different predispositions, or as you mentioned, as the question say, is any particular relation between the virus and the fungal. I mean, a lot of questions still unanswered, and as the pandemic evolved, we are learning more and more. But those definitely are questions that are there. I believe we will need to know more, and we'll see more about what are the predisposition or the individual characteristics that make each patient prone to develop A, B, or C fungal infection.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hidalgo. So is there any need for cohorting or isolating invasive fungal infected patients like mucormycosis? So what are the special precautions to be observed?
Well, as we know already, and we've been discussing, in particular with mucormycosis, we need to try to understand more in terms of what are the comorbidities of our patient when it's known. Sometimes, especially in our referral centers, we get patients that are very ill with not much information about what are the different comorbidities. Of course, most of the patients, when they're transferred to our centers, they are being manipulated with a lot of medications, steroids, and many other medications that it make them prone to develop different complications. In our institution, when they are already admitted, we know that we need to have a proper monitoring of steroids adjusted accordingly, as well as we need to monitoring if their diabetes or have a glycemic control properly follow. And most importantly, and especially when we are dealing with mucormycosis, you guys know better than me because you are seeing a huge number of cases. The earliest we can intervene is the best because, of course, it's going to be a better chance. And despite of that, we know that it's a fungal infection that have a high mortality, but also could be devastated in terms of recovery. As the cases that we see, especially the rhinocerebral or orbital, we know that it can cause an important challenge for the patient, especially when it comes to the figure of the patient. It could be a very traumatic recovery for them if they make it, because it could be also after that an involvement of plastic surgery and everything. But in any case, probably the most important one in ICU is a team effort. I mean that as many of us can get involved in the management of the patients are important. Unfortunately, as you also will know, the realities of each hospital is different. The resources of each area are definitely a challenge. It's not the same. I mean that we need to try to develop some guidelines that can easily applicable in different areas, especially those that are with limited resources.
Thank you very much, Professor Hidalgo. So there is a question that for rhinocerebral mucormycosis, early suspicion and detection and rapid start to targeted management is the key to success. So how and when we plan a surgical intervention? So who want to take the question? Anyone? Sudipta?
So I think surgical intervention to be done as early as possible when you identify there is a mucor infection, because source control is debriding all the dead tissues from the infected site is one of the most important intervention. And because mucor live on those dead tissues, so parallelly you have to identify it early, have to start an antifungal, and have to do the surgical intervention. But luckily, and most of these patients, what are happening, they are not developing the mucor during their ICU stay. Mostly they are going home. They are coming to our follow-up clinic in the COVID clinic. And then they are presenting with either from a blackish discoloration of the eyes or on the nasal mucosa. So it should be a mandatory practice to actively search for mucor infection in your follow-up patients. And if there is any, start your treatment with an antifungal, that is preferably liposomal amphotericin B, and have to go for surgical debridement to the earliest. And it have to be a ruthless debridement, have to remove all the dead tissues to have a better outcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. So actually, this is a very common question. I think Dr. Rajesh discussed this earlier, but actually, what are the common tests we should send before starting an empirical antifungal? So actually, and should we wait for the report?
Not really. If you are considering in a high risk patient, when we're talking about empirically, that means in appropriate high risk factor, you want to start in presumption that this patient can have a probable fungal infection because they have high dose, taken high dose steroid, they are immunosuppressed for a long time, and then there are other factors. So start empirical therapy, but simultaneously send the report. If it turns out to be negative, like radiologically, by histopathology, or by biomarker, then preferably you should stop the antifungal. So if you are starting empirical therapy, when we start? When there is a high risk of patient is dying because of probable disease. Like suppose somebody is on ventilator, you suspect Aspergillus. Suppose somebody has rhinocerebral disease, you suspect mucor or Aspergillus. Suppose somebody has bloodstream infection, they are in shock on ventilator, then you think to start Candida therapy. So empirical therapy has to start. But simultaneously, you send a report that after 48 hours, 72 hours, you probably know that you have to continue treatment or you have to stop it.
So yes, in our setup actually, in like I don't know what in India, but in Bangladesh, in very selective centers, we do this galactomannan assay. And so this question I can ask Professor Atikul Haq sir, that this how valid are the tests like beta D glucan or galactomannan assay? How valid are these tests? Sir, you are muted, sir.
Very much. I think these are good tests. Galactomannan is a good test for Aspergillus, though it is not very much specific. But even then, but the thing is that Galactomannan is available only in, I think, 3 or 4 centers in Bangladesh. So we cannot much, avail of this opportunity. And also, you have asked another question about, I would like to add one point that, often we ask for testing the swab for any, whenever we, suspect infection anywhere in the body. If a swab is collectible, we prefer to collect the swab and examine under microscope, either unstained, stained with, potassium hydroxide or various types of stains. But in this case, in mucormycosis, swabs are very much, I would say unproductive, unyielding type of a specimen. And that's why it is said that, till we wait for the reports of histopathology or other more specific methods, we may test either aspirated sample or scraping, but not swab. That is one thing that we should be aware of. Okay, thank you very much.
Sir. This is very, very important, actually, information. So, what I want to know, personally, I want to know when to shift this IV antifungal to oral. What will be like duration of therapy, and when we can decide that now we can shift it to oral? So, I think Dr. Rajesh, Sudipta, Hassan, Dr. Leelavati, anyone?
I think it varies, I would say, very much rightly, appropriately fits to the to today's topic. So I think Dr. Rajesh Mishra will be the most appropriate person to give answer to this very important question.
Yes, this is my question.
So shifting from IV to oral is something which is very, very case specific. Suppose you must know what you are dealing with. Suppose you are dealing with a bug like mucormycosis, or you are dealing with Aspergillus, or you are dealing with Candida. So if you are dealing with mucor, if your disease is stabilized, patient has become stable, you can definitely, which may take around 2 weeks, you can step down from IV amputation B to posaconazole tablet, and you can very well continue with that. if it is Candida albicans or non-albicans, most of the time these patients are in ICU, bloodstream infection. Preferably, they should be given IV injection. But if they become hemodynamically stable, they can absorb the drug, they can swallow, and you know the sensitivity pattern of what bug, because in oral form we have availability of only voriconazole, fluconazole, posaconazole, and isoconazole. So if the bug is sensitive to any of these drugs, patient has become stable, he can absorb, he can eat and drink, he can be shifted to IV to oral, but not in unstable state. As far as aspergillus is concerned, voriconazole has got very good oral absorption, even in unstable patients. So even for first 2 days, you can give IV and then straightforward we change to oral drug to save the cost. So particularly for aspergillus drug, even after 48 hours, they are unstable, you can use tablet. But others, you have to go case by cases. I think anything you want to add, Sudipta or Dr. Leela?
Yes. What my personal experience is, for mucormycosis, we used to give amphotericin for a long time, IV. And then after proper debridement, and whenever we came to know that there is no further mycelia growing, hyphae growing inside anywhere, then only we used to change it to posaconazole. Otherwise, amphotericin B for a long time. I mean, at least for 5 to 6 weeks. Because repeated debridements are needed. And
that's why I said that once your tissue is clear,
exactly,
and clinically stable, then you can change.
Then you can change. And regarding voriconazole, it used to be mostly, I mean, for 1 or 2 days, as you had said, you had perfectly said that for only 1 or 2 days oral IV, and then oral, you continue with oral. And for invasive candidiasis, what we used to do is that for 10 days you give continuously casfofungin or any kind of a candid, and then you can change over to second line, like I mean, you can step down to fluconazole later on if the if candida is, I mean, sensitive enough to fluconazole. So for 10 days, IV echinocandin is a must for invasive candidiasis.
Okay. There is a question from Dr. Gentle, and very happy that Gentle is there with us. He asked that, as obvious, diabetes mellitus is a proven risk factor for mucor. Of note, we now know COVID may induce new onset diabetes. In multiple mechanisms. So any experience of encountering mucor in this subset of patients with COVID-induced new onset diabetes? Dr. Rajesh?
Yeah. So, mucor is known to cause new onset, COVID is known to cause new onset diabetes, and a lot of our patients are on insulin therapy or some form of oral therapy for a very long time after discharge who were not diabetic. Can it precipitate to mucor or not? If diabetes is controlled, it is very unlikely. If we are using a lot of steroid along with that, because post-discharge also a lot of patients get discharged on steroid, which probably we need to cut down now. There are data and evidence to suggest that using more than 14 days of steroid for COVID may not be of any help. So if we can cut down the steroid, if we can control the sugar diabetes with insulin preferably, the risk of fungus will go down. But if we continue to give steroid at home, and if we ignore the sugar control or diabetes control, you may land up with a problem of different kind of fungus. It can be aspergillus, it can be mucor, it can be.
I just want to add one point regarding IV to oral. May I? Hello.
Yeah.
So as we discussed that regarding the modes, probably we need a very longer duration, and eventually we need to shift from IV to oral. The problem that happens that the absorption is erratic, and so it is not very predictable to get a adequate blood level, even for voriconazole and posaconazole. So doing a blood level for those azoles are very, very important. we are doing the blood level of voriconazole on the after day 5, the trot level. And posaconazole is also required a blood level, but that we are not, that is not available at the institute. So if someone in that situation, probably isavuconazole has a better advantage that it doesn't need to do a blood level for this molecule. And so whenever you are shifting from IV to oral, it is recommended to do a blood level for voriconazole or posaconazole.
Okay, so there is, I think, actually this from this bunch of question, I think we can Sabir Hussain, he asked there a role of endoscopic biopsy.
There is a role for endoscopic biopsy. If we are suspecting, particularly it's a nasal and particularly it's a bronchial, particularly we should do endoscopy of the upper airway or bronchoscope, do the bronch and try to take out the tissue to diagnose it early. Because once you find the fungus in lung, you know the treatment change and patient may need early pneumonia.
Okay, so there is a question that I think you answered is before, that is Simacha Dangal. He is that, sir, what is the role of hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
It is experimental, but if it is available in an institute, and particularly for mucormycosis, you can try.
Okay, so there is any role of CT or MRI?
Yes, MRI is preferred over CT scan for mucormycosis.
Okay. So now, actually, what is the question from everyone, that is you in this COVID situation? So, are you getting lots of patients who are coming with the post COVID syndrome and with mucor, like patient is going home after prolonged use of steroid and others, then patient are coming in the follow-up, and they're any kind of experience you have? Immunomodulator they got previously and they came with mucormycosis.
Lots of them. Lots of patients, particularly they're being discharged with high ferritin and oxygen therapy. Lots of patients are coming with secondary mucus, rhinocerebral or orbital involvement, and they're coming late. Mortality is very high. What we have seen in second wave, which is very particular, the post-COVID syndrome, particularly, even our oxygen requirement is coming down. We are sending them at home, but lots of patients, lots of them are dying at home. They're dying because of the secondary sepsis. They're dying because of the sudden late cytokine surge, which we don't know why it is happening. And they are dying because of the fungemia. They are dying because of the secondary sepsis. So what has happened in second wave? My personal experience, I don't know. I mean, if I would like to listen from Asan, Sudipta, Dr. Leelavati, but my experience was that in second wave, all the patients who were critical, whose ferritin level very high, nothing has worked for them, and ultimately whatever kind of management and support you do,
Okay.
95 out of 100, I mean, it's like 95% of these patients have died in due course of time, in less than 6 weeks.
So we have the same
We are
experience.
very helpless.
Same experience with us also.
Same
We
experience.
are so helpless in second wave.
Yes.
And who will develop this kind of high inflammatory marker will not know. A lot of patients who got early remdesivir, adequate steroid, suddenly they become hypoxic, normal CRP, and blood reports okay. You do the ferritin and D-dimer and find ferritin very high. And God knows what is happening with why ferritin are going so high. Whosoever has
Is there
high ferritin,
anything, what is the unique about this mucor?
mucor?
What is the unique thing? Actually, mucor, what is the exceptional, anything exception that you are getting from, I don't know, I can't, sir, can you explain? What I'm
No, no,
I can help Dr. Mishra,
yeah.
the most terrible exception is its high mortality.
yes.
I mean,
If
very,
there is any
very,
mucor
very
and
terrible
then the extensive surgery, it looks also very horrible. I have an experience when I have worked as an anesthetist in my earlier career. So I have given anesthesia to 2 such mucormycosis cases, rhino-orbital, and there was extensive debridement. And patient, if he looks himself in the mirror, he will be terrified. So that is the unique thing of mucormycosis. So we tried not to affect with the mucor rather than to
Not
treat.
not only rhino orbital, if it becomes a rhino orbitocerebral,
Cerebral, then
and it
it's,
becomes furthermore, I mean, dangerous to look at. Really.
yes, ma'am.
We had this kind of a patient when I was in Gangaram Hospital. So there was a lady who had a juvenile diabetes, and she landed up in a very bad mucormycosis, invasive and continuously invasive. And she had to undergo, I think, at least 5 debridements in front of me. And we all used to continuously give amphotericin B continuously, and it used to be a huge cost affair for all, I mean, for the patient's family. It was
But
really
the
bad.
same-
And
the
finally,
question-
he died.
I want to ask a question to Mr. Sir.
Dr.
One question is that you
Yeah,
said that
I'm not able to hear you.
Dr. Arafat, your connection is just try to say loud, I think.
Sir, I want to ask a question that you said that the blood products and iron therapy one of the respectable mucormycosis. You know that in case of chronic kidney disease patient, we are randomly using the IV iron therapy to restore the iron stored there and blood products. Would you please think of that before giving the IV iron therapy in this COVID situation or in this pandemic? Prior to giving the IV iron, you should go the fungal culture at first.
We don't use. Why do we need to give IV iron therapy? We don't use at all. I don't use at all IV iron therapy. Neither iron, neither desferrexamine. I mean,
I'm not using the nephrologist are using IV iron therapy randomly in CKD patients.
No, we don't have that practice here in India. We don't do. Sudipta, do you do that? Yashar, any of you?
No, sir, we are not using it. We are not using it. But just I want, as the question they have put in the chat box, that why mucor? I think, and why they probably the question they want to ask that why there's so other fungus, why this is happening only with the mucor or mucor become a concern. But basically, you have to understand that mucor is a combination of, it's a group of fungus, like either rhizopas, or most commonly is the rhizopas. And if we compare our old data of last 20 years, it is not new in India. There is a lot of work by Dr. Arunalak Chakrabarty, and we can see the incidence of mucor infection is significantly high in Indians compared to Western data. It is as high as 70 times compared to the Western data. So we are always prone to develop mucor infection, maybe because of our genetic susceptibility, also because of the large number of diabetic patients that is present in India. Now, what happened because of this ubiquitous use of steroid, and some people as using it in a very high dose, that increases the susceptible population in India. And as the fungus is ubiquitous, it's available everywhere in the surrounding, in the atmosphere. So those susceptible persons acquire the infection and gradually develop the infection. So it was always there because of rampant use of steroid, high dose of steroid. The population, the susceptible population has increased suddenly. And as a result, it becomes an epidemic and results a huge concern for all of us intensivists. And I agreed that it is really, really difficult to continue with the treatment. It's really costly to give a liposomal amphotericin B for 3 months. Per day cost is around 30,000-40,000 at least in Calcutta. And also the multiple debridement, specifically in a COVID positive patient, it can be really, really challenging.
So thanks a lot. Actually, we are getting late, and it's a very interesting, and actually we all are enjoying, and participants also. Actually, we have in lots of big doctors are also watching this program with us. So here is also Dr. Ismail Patwari.
Arafat, you want to ask something? Raise hand. Arafat, you want to say something or ask something?
But he's muted.
Okay.
Okay, no. So actually now I want to close the program actually. So before that, I want to thank you all, especially our chairperson, Professor Syed Atikul Haq sir, our keynote speaker, Dr. Rajesh Mishra, our special guest, Dr. Hidalgo. He actually texted that he has another meeting, so he left. And also all the esteemed panelists and Dr. Leelavati, Dr. Hassan, Dr. Arafat, Dr. Sudipto, Dr. Sihan. We learned a lot. Now to Professor Syed Atikul Haq sir to close the session.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before closure, I would say that, even in peacetime, I call this peacetime because now we are in the wartime with SARS-CoV-2. So during peacetime also, we had been quite negligent in achieving glycemic control in diabetic patients. I think in our country, less than 25% of the diabetic patients were in good glycemic control. So, and we now all understand that, mucormycosis is a very difficult disease to treat, not for diagnosis. Diagnosis will not be that much difficult in our country, but treating will be very much difficult because, the treatment is very expensive and also involves surgical excision, debridement, all these things which are, surgeons are also avoiding surgical procedures during this pandemic. So the treatment, if it, invades our country more aggressively, the mortality will become definitely very high because of these barriers, the barrier of cost, treatment, approach, all these things. So we have to be careful about prevention. We should target, prevention will be the most important thing that you can do. And for prevention, we have to take care of the glycemic control in the diabetic patients. We have to use steroids in mild and moderate COVID. That is very much important because steroids are being used quite rampantly in patients with mild and moderate COVID in our country. And also the steroids should be used judiciously and in the recommended doses, not as, sometimes use 20 to 30 milligram of, dexamethasone daily. The recommended dose is 6 milligram only. So recommended dose and for recommended duration, not lengthy. In our country, I have come across patients who had pulmonary COVID and have been given, methylprednisolone for 2 months for treatment of pulmonary fibrosis. So this is not recommended. So we shall avoid this abuse of steroid in our country. That is very much important. You have seen among the major risk factors, Dr. Mishra has mentioned, steroid is a major risk factor. And also we have to use antibiotics quite judiciously. We all know that, when antibiotics with a defined range spectrum of action, the organisms which are outside that spectrum, they get, opportunity to flourish because the competition is less. That is called superinfection. And also this superinfection is also one of the factors for fungal infections, including mucormycosis. There are such reports. So we have to avoid, antibiotics altogether in mild to moderate COVID, and we have to, exercise appropriate antibiotic stewardship in our severe COVID cases. And also in our country, I am speaking particularly for Bangladesh because actually the majority of the participants are from Bangladesh. So in our country, we have the habit of giving iron treatment for any patients with anemia without trying to find out the cause of anemia. So we have to avoid indiscriminate use of iron also in patients with anemia because we have seen iron is also one of the risk factors. So I thank Samarita Hospital authorities, healthcare, and BD physicians for organizing this excellent and very much timely, webinar. And it has been actually the participants have also participated quite actively. There were a lot of questions, and I felt that the enthusiasm was growing just by the end of 1.5 hour of presentations and discussion. But the time is limited, so we have to compromise. And with these few words, with thanks to all, I conclude this session webinar. Thank you very much.